Oops. Okay, so good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming out on a cloudy, rainy spring day. At least it's not white stuff falling down out there. My name is Jeff Urban. I'm the Education Director here at the Roosevelt Presidential Library and Museum. We are delighted to have you all here today. And on behalf of the National Archives and Records Administration here at the Roosevelt Presidential Library and Museum, we'd like to thank you all for coming out for the 12th annual Hudson Valley Historic Reading Festival. We would also like to thank the Friends of the Poughkeepsie Public Library District for partnering with us on this program. So way to go, local libraries. A special welcome to our virtual audience who are watching across our official social media accounts. And please note that each talk has its own link, and you can follow that at the top of the hour. Those links are provided in the video descriptions of every online video, and the entire schedule is there. Before I begin, I'd like to talk a little bit about the format for today. We will begin the talk at the top of the hour, and that'll be at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 1 o'clock, and 2 o'clock, with a break at noon for lunch. And I'll point out that Uncle Sam's canteen is open. So if you're worried about going off site and then getting back in time, we've got the canteen there for you as well. Our authors will speak for roughly 30 to 40 minutes, and then there'll be a Q&A to follow that. And then if time permits for that. And then at 45 minutes past the hour, we will break, and the authors will go out to the tables for book signings in the lobby by the New Deal store. And each of the authors will have their own table there, so you can meet with them there. And then at the top of the hour, we begin all over again. Okay, so nice, simple format for a nice rainy day. With that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, and that is none other than Christopher Cring. He is the author of 40 Hudson Valley Historical and Whimsical Observations from Anthony's Nose Mountain, and many other books. In addition to his background as an inventor and patent writer of search algorithms developed during his tenure as a software engineer at IBM, he writes document-based books on regional history and independently creates and publishes nature-themed coloring books. He's a member of the United States Professional Tennis Association and teaches tennis at Dutchess Community College, my old alma mater. Woohoo! Christopher holds certifications as a New York State licensed hiking guide and a certified financial planner from Marist College. He's also a published photographer, graphic designer, web programmer, and history guide tour guide, in Beacon, New York. He has also served as a board member for both the Howland Cultural Center and the Adirondack Hiking Club. So we're lucky that he was able to fit us into his schedule with all the things that he does. So please welcome Christopher Cring.
Hello. That's the cover of the book. And my son, Jason, designs. He's a graphic designer. He designed the cover. And so what I'm going to talk a little bit first is why I wrote this book. This is different than my other books. Most of my books are like 350, 400 pages where I delve into one particular subject. And this book is just a little bit about each. And I was really, the audience I was going for is not the typical history buff audience. So I wanted to just make it simple and try to encourage people to have some interest in some of these topics. And if they do, I always have an off ramp so you can go and find and delve into more detail. So I'll always, in each one of these topics, and I have 40 topics to cover. Obviously, I'm not going to do that now. I picked 5 out. And so there's a few things that I used to, this is my, the guidelines. I'm not going to go over these, but when I wrote this book, I had strict guidelines to myself of what I wanted this book to be about. And so one of my friends, Bob Murphy, I used to talk to him all the time. He wrote a lot of the Beacon history books. And one of the things we always worried about, we call it going down the rabbit hole of just coming up with all kinds of dates and names and events and leaving out stories. So we always try to avoid that, try to just have stories. People remember stories, right? They're going to be confused with, dates.
Get this a little closer to you.
And so anyway, that's why I wrote that. So I would hike at this mountain all the time, and it's actually a pretty moderate hike. And from this view, and I'll show you views in a second. Let me bring this up. Let me bring them out here. This is the mountain view, and from there you can see everything. It's like, there's 17 mountains on the east side to go through the Hudson Highlands, and 16 on the west side. And so the river turns right there, and that's really the start of the Hudson Valley. So there's a lot of history would pass through Anthony's Nose. So I used to always think when I would hike there, can you imagine if the mountain could talk? How much history, how many stories they would talk about, right? So I used to always write down things that you could see from there in the 35-mile range, right? What you could see. And so I wanted an arc right from the beginning. So I started with the Macedones, and I worked right up to 9/11. The 9/11 plane went right through there. And so these stories, a lot of them tie in together, right? You can see stories like, you'll see the Hindenburg came up the mountain, and there was all the dignitaries on there, and it had the big red swastika on there. And then a couple of years later, the Roosevelts came up, King and Queen, and had a picnic not far from here, and trying to get America involved in the war. And then later on, there's Iona Island, which you can see there is where they stored all the military supplies. So there was a 100-yard ship there going to get military supplies. And the name of the ship was the first person that got killed in Pearl Harbor. So a lot of those things tie into each other. Same with Lincoln. Lincoln came by there 3 times, right? And so I'm going to talk about try to cover 6 stories pretty quick as I can. And like I said, there's 40 of them here. And so the other thing that I thought was important, Liz Armstrong was an excellent editor. I had her edit the book. She edited it earlier, one of my earlier books. And it's a very humbling experience working with Liz. It's worth it when you get through the end, right? And so I always make a joke, like, to keep those books hidden, where they're all like marked up, right? It reminds me when I was in 8th grade, right? You have all these marks all over, right? And that's about it. And the other thing is people have been commenting about this book. So I give this book out. I've given out about 100 of these books because I really like these stories. And so one person told me, he said, I really love this book. I keep it by my bed, and it helps me to go to sleep. So I kind of take that as a compliment, right? So anyway, here's the, I'm going to start in with the stories. These are the 40 stories. So, and what's good about when you're, sorry, I got to go stand by the mic. What's good about reading a book as opposed to a movie, if you don't like one of these stories, you just turn the page, right? And move on, right? If you like it, then, I keep the phone next to me and then go off on tangents and, do further research, right? If it intrigues you, right? So it's your choice. You're in control, right? So these are 40 stories. And this is a little introduction. The mountain is about 900 feet tall. And I used to say to people sometimes, and I don't say it anymore, I say that's just 70. You start at 200 and it's about 70 flights of stairs. And I realized people didn't think that was that great, right? When they heard 70 flights of stairs. But you just go, this what they call switchbacks, right? So you go through. So anybody could really hike that mountain if you take your time. And if you don't want to hike the mountain, you could go at Bear Mountain across the way and get similar views, or go to Fort Montgomery and get similar views, right, of the rich history that passed through this area. These are old postcards of Anthony's Nose. And what's great about Anthony's Nose is you see how flat it is up there? So when you get up to the top, it's unbelievable. It's like an amphitheater. And it's not like an edge of a cliff where you feel like you're going to fall off, right? It's not like that. It kind of tapers down. So it's just a big area. And there's sometimes as many as 100 people up the top, right? And they're all a little happy because they just got endorphins, right? But the views are tremendous. And you could just stay up there. You just look. You don't even want to come down. That's what I feel, right? And so it's flat. It's flat up top, right? So this is a couple of references. There's a lot of postcards that I just showed you out there. This is a couple references to Anthony's nose that I thought were funny. This first paragraph right here is from, see the date of it. General William Alexander, Lord Sterling. He was Washington's friend, and one time when Washington would be out of town, or he would Sterling would take over his command. So they had a trusted relationship. So he asked Sterling, he says, could you go and size up the area and see where we need fortifications, right? So he wrote back, this is a letter he wrote back. He said, a point of land called Anthony's Nose, which at many 100 feet high, very steep and inaccessible to anything but goats or men, very expert in climbing. A body of riflemen placed here would be of very great use in annoying an enemy, as the decks of every vessel that passes must lie open to them, right? Well, it's not really true. You don't have to be a goat, and you don't have to be an excellent climber. But back then you did, because they didn't have these trails. So it was just, just go right up the face. And then there's another, he was like an engineer for Washington. He had him size up the mountain. What I think about is interesting about this note is this was from Rufus Putnam, right? And this is one of the problems you have when you're trying to find these letters. If you look right here, he says, since your excellency left this place, I have been, B-E-N, to Antonies, right? A-N-T-O-N-I-E-S, nose, right? So when they use these letters are difficult to find because you can't search on Antonies, right? So some of these letters, and there's thousands of these letters out there that you can't really relate them to, when you're trying to. And so this guy, Rufus Putnam, was self-made. He wasn't well educated, but he worked his way up to an engineer. He was trusted by Washington. And right now there's a little section of West Point that's named after him, right? And so he used to run a mill, and then he read books, and he worked his way up to being a trusted engineer. So the first talk I'm going to do, number one, I'm going to do a talk about the giant mastodons that were in the area. If you go to Bear Mountain Zoo, they have a beautiful museum there, and they have all the mastodon horns, right? And so the first mastodon ever found was about 20 miles from Anthony's Nose. It was in Orange County. And up to then, they never found a mastodon, right? And as most people know, they found a mastodon recently, a few years back in not far from here in Hyde Park. So they were all over the place, right? And this mastodon, when they found it, kind of like the Briar tuckrats, it was in the mud in a pond, right? So they had problems getting the mastodon out, right? So everybody wanted this mastodon. What was interesting about this story, in France, there was this, his name was, I can't really pronounce it. It was funny, it's Buffon, right? Comte de Buffon of France, right? He ridiculed the United States, that's saying there was no big game there. And he said that, and he was always fighting with Jefferson, right? So when Jefferson heard that this mastodon was available, he wanted to buy it. So I mentioned right here, and I give you a link, there's about 20 letters where Jefferson's involved, where he's so excited about this mastodon to prove this Buffon is wrong, right? One time, Jefferson, even John Sullivan he was a general, and then he was governor of New Hampshire. He wanted the biggest moose, so they sent out 20 soldiers in New Hampshire to find the biggest moose they could find and capture it. It didn't go very well, right? And so he was obsessed with that. So you can, if you go up, and that's that off ramp where I was telling about. You can go up and you go read those letters if you're interested. I tell you where they are about Jefferson, right? And so what happened was, let me show you. The one who actually bought it was Charles Wilson Peale, right? And this is one of his paintings. This is a painting. So they had to figure out how to get this mastodon up. So they needed to empty the pond, right? And so he created, Peale was amazing. He was one of those Renaissance men that did everything, right? He was an engineer, He owned a museum in Philadelphia. He was a painter, a writer. This painting, one of his paintings, one of them just sold for $24 million, right? And so when I was looking at this painting, this barge, a barge came by Anthony Nose with this contraption that he created, right? To try to get this Macedon out of there. And as you can see, it's just a series of buckets on this pulley to try to get, the idea was to get the water out of the lake, right? And he invented this. And so he did a lot of things. And the other thing was, as strange was, he was also a dentist, right? That kind of didn't really fit in with everything else that he did. But his paintings, you can see this painting is really elaborate, right? So they got the Macedon out, and then it went to his museum, and then the museum, he ended up dying, and who came along? P.T. Barnum bought it, sucker born every minute. He bought the Macedon, then he died, and then a German, Jacob Cobb, bought it. Macedon was over in Germany. It was bombed in an air raid. It was down in the basement. It was saved. They brought it back to Smithsonian. So it has like a story of its own, this first Macedon that was ever found, right? And so now it's back to the German museum, right? So that's the story of the Macedon. And so Jefferson was really involved in it. Okay, so the next one I'm going to do is totally different. This is, I skipped around, obviously, so because I have a lot about the Native Americans that were in the area. And so this is Benedict Arnold, the treason uncovered. And so everybody knows about Benedict Arnold, right, and what happened. And so I'm going to do this as like a play to show you, like, here's the characters. So here's Benedict Arnold, right? And you notice the way he's dressed. I'll get to that in a minute. He's always dressed really dapper, right? There's Benedict Arnold. And there's Andre. Andre was the British spy. They always said he was an adjunct general, but he wasn't an adjunct general. That was just a title they gave him, right? They're not going to say spy, right? So he was a British spy, and the reason he was, and this is Clinton. He was the general in New York City at the time. There's 20,000 troops in New York City, right? They had New York City, and so Clinton was involved. So these were the protagonists. These were the villains, right? Andre was very charismatic. Very charming. He knew 4 languages. He was a good painter. And they'd always say he could sing, right? I don't know why. They always throw that in. Every time you look at a biography, they say he could sing, right? You don't think of somebody, a spy that could sing. So everybody liked him. Everybody that met him liked him. So those were the 3 characters. Now the next group, this one I found interesting, and then I'm going to set this up like a play. This is Peggy Shippen. This is Arnold's new wife, and she just had a baby, right? So this is Peggy, and she was a Loyalist family. She was from Loyalist, right? And Andre was in Philadelphia, and he was staying in Ben Franklin's house when they took over Philadelphia, right? So Andre was in there, and they actually stole a lot of paintings from Franklin's house when they occupied it, right? And Peggy Shippen became friends with Andre, and that was the tie in there, right? So, and there's Alexander Hamilton, he's always around, and there's George Washington, right? And this rock right here, this is the Daughters of the American Revolution that put this rock up. This is a rock to honor Rifleman Jack Peterson and Moses Sherwood. A lot of people don't know who they are. And Peterson was a soldier of African and Native American Croatian descent and was considered a sharpshooter. He had a long career in the military, and he had 11 children, and he lived to 103. And so now you know all the characters, and now I'm just going to go through exactly what happened from the. Oh, this is the ship Vulture that I'm going to talk about in a second. This is where Andre was. Okay, so I'm going to do it from this map here. So this is actually a 1780 map, which is right, coincidentally right at the time when this occurred, right? Let me get to the map here. So here's West Point, right? Here's Beverly Robinson's house. This Beverly Robinson, he's a man named Beverly, and he married the Phillipstown to Patton, right? So he was wealthy, and he was a Loyalist. A lot of the if you were wealthy, you had a good life, and a lot of them became loyalists, right? So he was a British loyalist, and this is a barge, and I'll talk about it in a minute. This is Vulture, and this is where that rock is. And so this is Anthony's Nose. On this map, they call it St. Anthony's, right? This is Anthony's Nose. So anybody sitting at Anthony's Nose has a bird's eye view, like a plane going by. So here's what happened. Benedict Arnold he managed to be the general of this whole area. And so he was going to allow the British to take over. He was in charge of West Point, and he was sending everybody out, so it wasn't fortified as much as it should be, right? And he really wanted to capture Washington too. So it would have really ended the war, right? So he was living as a general. That was his headquarters, was in the Robinson House. So he was there, Peggy was there, and his child was there, his new child, right? They were there. And he would come down on a barge, and he came down here, and he would meet Andre. It's like this. Hold on a second. Andre came off the ship, the Vulture, and he would meet him right here by Stony Brook. So Benedict Arnold would come down, and he came down and meet Andre, and he would give him all the plans. He would tell him what Washington was going to do, and he gave him plans of West Point. Andre took all the information, and he was going to go back to the Vulture. He came over on a little rowboat to the Vulture, right? Meantime, Rifleman Jack and Sherwood, they were shooting it. They saw the ship there, so they started shooting at it, right? From that rock, right? And so they were shooting at it, and so the Vulture, the British ship, had to go back down. They shot at it first, and then they went back to Fort Lafayette, and they brought a cannon back, right? They shot at the ship with a cannon. So 30 years later, the captain wrote a journal about it, and he said that because of the cannon, he actually got a piece of wood in his nose. So he backed up. The Vulture had to go back down. Now, Andre met all night with Arnold. He went back to the Vulture, and it was gone, right? Because of Rifleman Jack and Sherwood, they shot at it, right? So it came down. So now Arnold had no choice but to go across. They gave him a horse, and they gave him civilian clothes. So now he had to go across over to Westchester County and try to get to New York City. Westchester County was a tough area. It was like that, the no man's land, right? Where it was just wild, right? And so 3 New York militias, and a lot of people know that story, they captured Andre. They captured Andre, and he had all the plans in his boot, right? And so he was confused because one of the captors had a Hessian uniform on because they didn't have a lot of weapons, and they had captured a Hessian before. Hessians were on the British side. So he thought it was British, right? He thought it was friendly group. So anyway, so Arnold, they got caught. So now they were confused because he had a passage from Arnold. So they sent a note up to Arnold, and he realized that they caught him, so he had to leave. So he takes off immediately. And there's a funny letter where he goes from Heath. He rode as fast as he got a horse. He left his wife there. He left his child there. And he goes on a barge, right? And he forced his crew to row. And he was rowing down to the Vulture, and he had to go pretty far. So there's the barge going by. So if you're on Anthony's Nose, you're seeing this barge go by with Benedict Arnold trying to escape because he knows they just uncovered his plot. Meantime, Washington and his entourage, Hamilton, Lafayette, McHenry, they were just at a meeting with French Minister Zern up in Fishkill, over, we'll be right about here. So they were coming in, and they were going to meet Benedict Arnold for breakfast. They come to the house. He's not there. He's trying to escape. They don't know what's going on yet. Washington says, let me go over to West Point. He goes over to West Point. He says, this is terrible here. The fortifications aren't filled. He comes back all angry. And then they since brought Andre back. They realized what it was. So Hamilton was there, and Lafayette, and they told him what happened, that they caught Arnold. And so Washington said right away, he sent Hamilton and Lafayette, and a few of his dragoons or soldiers on horses to go down the river as fast as possible and try to catch him. They couldn't catch him, right? And so they did catch Andre. So I'm going to read you about 5 letters that I think are really set the scene. 5 letters from Arnold when he was, one of them is from Arnold when he was on the ship. So he's on the ship. Let's see here. Okay, the first one was from William Heath. I'll just put the map back. First one is from William Heath. He says, and this is from in his memoirs. He says, he was there. He says, Arnold's panic was so great when he found that the plot was discovered that he called out for a horse, any horse that first came to hand, if it were a wagon horse. That's what they had. Upon the horse being brought, the general mounted. Instead of passing to the landing by the usual path, he rode down a steep bank where it seemed impossible for a horse with a rider to get down without being unhorsed, right? So he was in a hurry. He left his wife, he left his kid, he got down there, he went on the barge, he got to the Vulture, right? Then he writes, in a truce boat, he sends a letter right from the boat to Washington, right? And he was friends with Washington all those years, right? And so he still like kind of trusted him, right? So here's the letter. He gives Hamilton the letter. Hamilton brings the letter back up to the house, and he says, "The heart which is conscious of its own rectitude," this is Arnold saying why he did it, "cannot attempt to pallet a steep which the world may censor as wrong. I have ever acted from a principle of love to my country since the commencement of the present unhappy contest between Great Britain and the colonies. The same principles of the love to my country actuates my present." He's going on and on and on about why he did it, right? And then he asked Washington, would he please send my wife and child back to me, or send him back to Philadelphia, right? And he did. But what I get a kick out of, the last paragraph, he says, "I have also to ask that my clothes and baggage," and he's sending this to Washington, right? He says, "I want my clothes back." He says, he's telling Washington, he says, "I have also to ask that my clothes and baggage, which are of little consequence, may be sent to me. If required, I'll even pay it," right? So like he really wanted Washington to go send his clothes. Of course, he wouldn't need the Continental uniforms. He's not going to need those anymore, right? But he wanted his clothes. So then after I read that, I would always see Arnold, and he was always so dapper. He loved his clothes. So in the midst of all this, what's going on, he wants to make sure that Washington remembers to go in his closet and his bureau and send back his clothes, right? So here's a letter from, and all these letters are in there. I'll just leave this map up, right? Lafayette, James McHenry, he sent a letter. He says, he copied the letter that Arnold sent to Peggy. I like to read these because not just, here, I'm just going over them a little bit, but they set the tone, right? Instead of somebody telling you what happened, I love to read, real letters, right, if I can. So the letter that he wrote to Peggy says, "Thou loveliest, thou best of women, words are wanting to explain my feelings and distress on your account, who are incapable of doing wrong, yet are exposed to suffer wrong. I have requested His Excellency, General Washington, to take you under his protection and permit you to go to your friends in Philadelphia," right? And he's saying, "God Almighty bless thee, blah, blah, blah." Well, they found out later that she was involved right from the beginning, right? Later on, they found out these letters in the memoirs of the British memoirs that Peggy was involved right from the beginning. She was involved in the plot, right? So, and then there's another letter here, Hamilton. If you read any of Hamilton's letters, and I've read hundreds of them, he's such an elegant writer, and he's so dramatic, right? And they're fun to read. I have a whole book that I wrote, just about Hamilton's newlywed years. So Hamilton writes, writes to Schuyler, right? Elizabeth Schuyler. He says, "In the midst of my letter, I was interrupted." So he was writing another letter to him, right? He was always writing. Some of his letters 31 pages, right? Hamilton letter, 31 pages, like crazy, right? In the midst of his letter, I was interrupted by a scene that shocked me more than anything I have ever met with. Discovery of a treason of the deepest dye. The object was to sacrifice West Point. General Arnold had sold himself to Andre for this purpose. The latter came but in disguise, and in returning to New York was detected. Arnold, hearing of it, immediately fled to the enemy, right? And then he goes on to speak about what happened. He goes, I went in pursuit of him and was much too late. And I could hardly regret the disappointment when on my return, I saw an amiable woman frantic with distress, that was Peggy, for the loss of a husband she tenderly loved, a traitor to his country and in his fame, and disgrace to his connection. It was the most affecting scene I had ever witnessed to, right? Always the drama. And then he goes on and on and on about what Peggy did, how she was screaming and yelling, she was upset, blah, blah, blah. He goes on. I got the letter in there, right? And then Lafayette wrote to Anne Cesar. He says, Lafayette says, when I left you yesterday morning, Monsieur Le Chevalier, they left from Fishkill, to come here to breakfast with General Arnold, we were far from imagining the event that I am going to relate to you. West Point has been betrayed, and by Arnold, the same man who had covered himself with glory in rendering conspicuous service to his country. So that's the story. So what happened was those villains, Andre, most people know, was hung, right? And became a big problem in Europe. And they put John Trumbull, they were all upset. Everybody liked Andre. And so he was hung. And then Benedict Arnold went back, and he actually fought against our country, right, as a general. But he went back to England. He was disgraced. Andre, after he was hung, Britain put John Trumbull, famous artist, did a lot of the Yorktown scenes. They put him in jail as a spy. They said he was a spy. They put him in jail for 7 months, right? And then Andre's body was just buried in the gallows right below. And then later on, we became friends with England. England wanted his body back, and he's actually buried in Westminster Abbey with all the kings and queens. That's what they thought of Andre. And so Arnold lived, he went back to England, lived a life, but he was never really trusted, right? He was always like thought of as a spy. Now, everybody knows Hamilton. They had a play. Washington went on to be General Lafayette. You think of Lafayette as almost a street everywhere in every city, right? That's named Lafayette. So the next one I was going to do, but I don't have time. I'm going to do a whimsical one now. I had a problem picking out, a few stories right out of the 40. This is one I like. This is the world's, I like them. This is the first steamboat, right? So, and that changed the world, right? With steam, right? You had before, if you couldn't move, right? You had a sailboat and the winds died out, you were in trouble, right? So Robert Fulton, inventor, Pennsylvania, right? He's 42 years old. He meets Livingston, Robert Livingston, right? They were both in Paris. Livingston was in Paris, and then they met. He saw that Claremont, he created a ship he was working for Napoleon, actually, and he did the Nautilus, one of the first submarines, right? So he had always had an idea of steamboat and Hudson River, and Claremont, Livingston's lived up north, up by Hudson, right, the Claremont estate. So he hired Claremont. They went back and they built this first steamship. And he knew in politics that if he could get the steamship, he would get a monopoly because he was involved with the government. And he did. He got a monopoly for 20 years, right? So they built the first steamship. And what happened was everybody wanted to ride on the first inauguration ship, right? And so it was really expensive and a lot of dignitaries rode. But there was some flaws in it. They were on the deck, and it was run by coal. And if you ever go on a coal train, or I did one in New Hampshire one time, there was you get little coal dust on you, right? So they were dressed in suits, right? They're all dignitaries, paid a lot of money for this first voyage. It went from New York up to Albany, stopped at Claremont for a big breakfast. And so the smokestacks were too short, and the smoke wasn't filtered. So this was all coal coming out. The biggest problem was there was no covers for the wheels. So what was happening was, as the wheels were turning, water was coming up from the Hudson, driftwood was coming up, dead fish were coming up. They were all coming on the deck, and then the coal was coming down from the smokestack. It was really loud. There was very little bearings on the first wheels. So it was just loud, clanky. You got coal all over you. You had to worry about fish falling down, wood falling. It was just, and they were just with these suits on, pretending like this was like the best thing in the world, right? But it was the first voyage, right? And of course, everybody on the side, there's always those people on the side that always say, it's never going to make it, folly. I try not to be one of those, because all through history, there's always the people that say, it's not going to work it, right? They always, and so they were there on the side, right? So that's a replica. So obviously it was successful. And then there was at one time, this is the price. I have the prices from when the steams was like, you can see the prices there, $1.50, 50 cents. You could go all the way from New York City up to Albany, right? It had the different stops. And at one time there was as many as 50, a lot of them were for ferry boats, right? 50 steamships on the Hudson River alone. And then obviously New Orleans, Mark Twain, and the whole bit, right? It changed the world, right? With these. But the first one went by Anthony's Nose, and that was the story of the ship. And Claremont actually married a Livingston. He actually got engaged on the first voyage, right? That was part of it. And you can see here it's going by. You can see the new ones. They always have covers, right, on the wheels. It was just the first few that didn't have any covers, right? And so you can see, and of course that's Anthony's Nose, right, and steamships. And there's Claremont, right? Claremont ended up dying of tuberculosis. He tried to save his friend in the river. And he ended up dying. They always called it consumption, right? You always see it consumed you, right? So next story I'm going to talk about, I'm going to do a Franklin Roosevelt story, since I'm in the FDR site. And you see, now they're saying now, the historians are saying that Franklin, when he caught polio, he was 39 years old, and he was swimming with the Boy Scouts. Okay. So he's swimming with the Boy Scouts, right? He caught polio, and this is the picture from the FDR. It was called Hessian Lake, right? It's really, Hessian Lake was the name because there was Hessians died in there, right? One time there was 200 bodies in Hessian Lake, but it's a bare mountain. You can see it really clear from Anthony's Nose, right? So there he is with the Boy Scouts, and they discovered that 3 or 4 Boy Scouts also caught polio. And it takes 2 weeks for the incubation period. So then when he goes back up on vacation, then he started seeing the signs, right? So he caught polio, and everybody knows the story, especially here, right? And then so he, what I like was he used his inheritance to start the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis, he called it, right? But he picked Basil O'Connor, right? Basil O'Connor he didn't pick him for Secretary of State or for Chief of Staff, right? He picked him to run the March of Dimes, right? He never took any money for the whole time he was there, right? And he ran it for like 20 years, right? And Basil grew up poor. You can go off and do an offshoot on him. He's fascinating life, right? He grew up poor, highly successful, and whatever business he did, he was successful. So that's why FDR wanted him for this mission, right? And so, they started the March of Dimes. Everybody has a dime, right? So they wanted the whole country involved, right? So everybody could send in a dime. And this is at the White House, was 30,000 letters, most of them for children, right? They had every sidewalk, every restaurant had little dime banks, right? People probably remember that, right? People were sending in. So this is how many letters, this is how many letters they received, right? And he always was around polio victims, right? I mean, this is a parade, right, where he's bringing them through. So Jonas Salk, everybody knows that, right? After 7 years, he came up with the vaccine, right? And I always like this. They asked him, is he going to patent it, right? He said, no, it'd be like patenting the sun, right? It's free to everybody, right? And this is the dime because because of the March of Dimes, FDR, they changed the dime, right? They put FDR's picture on the dime, right? And so this is the papers before the fold, obviously that went crazy all over the world. Okay, I had about a few more stories there, but I'm pretty much out of time, right? So I'm gonna have to stop there. Thank you. I could talk for 8 hours on this these stories. But yeah, I'll take some questions.
Please forgive me because I came in late. I grew up in Rockland County and I never quite got a handle. I know there was the Battle of Stony Point, and I believe Major Andre was tried on a ship on the Hudson off of Rockland, or something went down my way involving Andre. Could you offer any clarity on that, or do I have it totally wrong?
Yeah, there was a big deal. I actually wrote a lot about it in my Alexander Scammell book. I have about 25 pages on it. What happened was it was a big controversy when Andre was there, and even he was held captive. First, he was brought up to Beverly House, and then they brought him to right by Stony Cove. It's been taken down, but there's a little section there where it has a like the Hewitt House or something where he was, and they kept him. Is right where he was hung. And so the trial was really involved, and you could read, if you go to Founders, you'll see a 10-page description. Go to founders.gov and type in Andre of the actual trial, everything that happened with the trial, right? And so there was a big controversy because the Continental Congress in Washington said that a tree should be hung, and Hamilton and Lafayette and Andre wanted to go across the firing squad, right? And so, sounds silly, right? You're both going to die, right? But it was important to them, and there's letters going back continuously about that. But Washington knew it was important. He knew England was watching, so he had 8 generals in the court-martial and to review everything. And so there was a big concern about, was he a spy? Because he had civilian clothes on, he was a spy. If he left the uniform on, he would have just been captured it would have been different, right? Because he was, Arnold gave him those clothes, right? He gave him the clothes. So yeah, if you really want, I don't really have time to hear, but if you really, just go to founders.gov and type in a few things, and you'll see 2 hours worth of reading, all the details about where it was, pictures, and because he was an artist, he even drew pictures of himself in the little cell while the trial was going on, right? Yep.
Good morning. I'm curious about your research process, so you can elaborate more. Collecting research for your books, do you find that you use online, digitize the documents more often, or are you visiting sites like the Library of Congress and doing that research with the actual primary sources?
Okay. Yeah, the old method was you would go to Columbia University or go here, and you would go in, you put white gloves on, you look at all the transcripts, right? Now, it's amazing. All these documents are out there. The best one is founders.gov. The problem is all these, they all have their own indexing, they're all searches. So if you want to search at founders.gov, if you want to do Boolean searches to exclude, right? I always say if you want to read every one of Washington's letters, it would take you 8 hours a day for 5 years, right? Because he had a lot of staff that read all these letters. And so you want to start excluding things like Washington was, and so you have to just spend a little time understanding the search methods for the site you're going at. FDR has their own search method. So you want to go to the site, right? If you use Google, you'll find a few things, right? But you really want to go to founders.gov, Columbia University, Church of Latter-day Saints has great historical, they always collected a lot of historical documents. The FDR site, Library of Congress. And so you have to spend a little bit of time looking how they set up their search, how they set up their indexes, right? And then, you have that. But all those documents now are out there, Internet Archive, just amazing. We're finding things now. I wanted to do the Battle of Yorktown. I have beautiful letters from the French lieutenants, the French aide-de-camp, when they first met Washington, describing the troops, describing the people, right? Those letters weren't available 100 years ago. And some of them, when I wrote a book on Luzerne, I had to translate a lot of them myself. So we're continually, because of that, and the other thing was, a lot of these letters were in people's living rooms. A lot of wealthy people, I see when I was doing Luzerne, I'd say, one of these letters was, for sale for $28,000, right? So they buy the letter, they put it in the living room, nobody ever sees it. So what Founders is doing is finding out where all these letters are, making copies of them, and putting them online, and doing the transcript. And they have 4,000 people, volunteers doing that. So founders.gov is a good source. And so now going to the sites is not necessary anymore. It's pretty much all online, right? So you can almost really have courses on where to find all this information. But we're finding things now that we never existed before, right? And so we have to rewrite history and revision it, right? And change it, make it accurate, right? So does that answer your question? Sorry.
I would just like to point out that although all that stuff is online, you still need to go to the source.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, our local presidential library. So please make sure that a lot of
Well,
these
you have quite a bit out there.
Yeah.
Like I notice you keep adding more and more, right? But if you don't want to travel, sometimes you still got to do that, right? And it's nice to see the actual letters, right? But you can't go to 100 sites. I use 100 sites, right? And so, any other questions? I love the air here. We just went last week, right?
There was any collusion in letting Arnold escape?
I'm sorry?
Do you think there was any collusion in letting Arnold escape out of the country? They didn't want to have the publicity.
Yeah, I'm not sure. There's always a lot of speculation, but I'm big on primary source, right? And there's always a lot of folklore. There's a lot of speculation. There's always a lot of theories. And I haven't seen that, but I've heard that theory before. Until it's proven with primary source, right? Then I'm always skeptical. I always keep an eye open, but I'm not sure. But I've heard that before, but I've never seen any, primary source indicating that. I know later on they found the British letters, and his new wife, who was from a Loyalist family, was directly involved. They have letters from her, later on, right? Over when a lot of the Britons, they started writing memoirs and releasing a lot of those documents, right? You could see that. So they're still, finding more things, but I don't know for sure, right? But I've heard that before. But I've never seen anything, any real proof.
Well, how about another round of applause for our speaker this morning? And we're going to head out and take a little break. There'll be a book signing out in the lobby, and then at the top of the hour, we'll start again with our next author.
Yeah. Oh, I see.
Great job. Come on, let's go this way.
I only did 2 stories.
Oh, I know.
That's